Okay, so we're going to start how to navigate educational services in the school environment. And Sarah and I have tried to focus our presentation to help you understand what the process is and how to get the best supports for students that are diagnosed bipolar or that have other mood disorders. So here we go. All right, so we're going to be talking about the identification and diagnosis very briefly, and then we're going to be talking about the most important part, which is obtaining services. And there are two ways of obtaining services, 504 or through IDEA. And we're going to talk about the services in kinder through 12th grade for 3 years through 22 years of age. And then we'll also talk about getting some accommodations in college and what to do when so we have parent and individual rights that Sara will touch on as well. And we're going to focus on meeting the educational needs of people that are diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And we're going to provide for you a roadmap from diagnosis to services. Kind of. Because every case is very specific. These are some of the terms that you're going to be hearing today. Section 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. IDEIA, or sometimes referred to just as IDEA, is 2004. It are the laws that we have to follow. So
the IDEIA is the Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act. So in 2004, they think they fixed it better. We all have opinions about that.
Okay, and then parent rights, we'll be discussing your procedural safeguards, handicapping conditions for someone diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then we'll talk about accommodations and modifications, and we'll talk about the difference between both of those. Okay? So, these are all available. Is that correct, Ashley?
Yes.
If they're interested?
Yes.
So, and I need to say something about Ashley. Ashley is uniquely organized and contacted me many months ago and conscientiously, I'm not going to say hounded, but pursued all of the different components of what we needed to do to bring this together today. And my hat's off to her. I wish every organization had someone as conscientious with all of the parts of what I needed as she has been. So you guys are lucky.
Absolutely. So this is, yes, absolutely. So this is the criteria for bipolar disorder, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the criteria, but Ashley is going to be forwarding this email to anyone that's interested in receiving it. You can probably Google it as well and get the definitions there. What we're going to go into is the bipolar symptoms in children. And so I interviewed a psychiatrist, Dr. Van Ramertier, and these are some of the examples that she gave me of what you can see or will often see in children. And this is really important because as a former teacher myself, having students in the classroom sometimes and not really understanding what's going on and seeing some of the behaviors, I thought, wow, this would be so telling, to know. So anyway, she mentioned that temper tantrums are pretty severe and that they can't seem to get over them, and that was really important. And parents that reflect back on, once the children are diagnosed, they said that their infants were often difficult to soothe, and they were very clingy and had some separation anxiety. Of course, there's the rules do not apply to them, the element of grandiosity, and in children, another point that she stressed was that there is not a clear-cut episode of mania and depression. Children tend to cycle rapidly through the highs and the lows, and that the mania is often manifested by irritability. So it's not this happy kind of...
like buying a new car. They're not interested in buying a new car. Right. They may be irritable, cranky, upset, anxious, and crossing. So that is in a child more of what you might see for a mania.
Absolutely. Depression as well. Child may speak of wanting to die or take huge risks in their lives. It's often misdiagnosed, and this was, especially with younger children, another point that the doctor stressed. It is often misdiagnosed as ADD or ADHD. It is often comorbid with ADD and ADHD. But so in very young children, what happens is that oftentimes they will get diagnosed as having ADD or ADHD. And what was explained is that if they are placed on the mood stabilizers and they're not experiencing any longer any of the inattention, that could be because it's bipolar, not ADHD. If they're placed on ADHD medication alone and you're still having the other symptoms, then you need to continue to look for answers. So, and then there was this was another point that was stressed, the hypersexuality. And it occurs in children. Do you want to go on, talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'll talk about hypersexuality. Kids with Tourette or on the autistic spectrum, perhaps kids like this, start talking about things that you wonder, my goodness, at 5 and 6, where would this be coming from? Where would they even know about this? And why would they be so preoccupied with it? So it's a warning sign. I wanted to say that another condition that can be very confusing when kids are little, because as they get older, there's more clarity to what's going on, is autistic spectrum. So when you look at some of these things like the grandiosity, if you have a 5-year-old or 6-year-old Asperger's child, sometimes they don't get that they're the child and they need to be more deferential to adults. And they'll speak to adults in a way to kind of make it sound like they feel they're equal. And they are not getting the social perspective taking that a child their age typically gets. But there can be all of these various things going on. I honestly think often doctors don't know what's really happening until maybe 10, 11, 12. And they'll try medications and then ask the families, well, how's that seem to work? Is that alleviating symptoms? But unless you see a child in an inpatient setting 24/7, it's very difficult to really get a good diagnosis. And as I say, there's often not clarity until they're older.
Absolutely.
Dr. Van Reemorgen
Reemorgen
didn't say that. Those were my things.
Absolutely. Okay, and then here are the bipolar symptoms in adults. And we have the symptoms of mania on, what is it on?
And adults can be 18 and up. So we're talking college age too.
Okay, so the long periods of feeling high, and so this is a little bit more, instead of the irritable mania, you have a little bit more of that high, happy feeling.
I want to buy a new car.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Shocking, right? That's actually an issue sometimes. Then we have some of the behavior changes that occur during the mania is talking very fast, jumping from one to another, from one idea to another, being easily distracted. That's why it's often confused with ADD or ADHD. Being restless, sleeping little is a huge issue. Having unrealistic beliefs in one's abilities, impulsive again. A lot of pleasurable, high-risk behaviors. And then in the depression, or a depressive episode, long periods of feeling worried or empty, loss of interest in activities once enjoyed, including sex, eating, self-care, or hygiene. And the behavior changes there, we can see there's a feeling of being tired, being slowed down, having problems concentrating, remembering and making decisions. So, changes in eating and sleeping, preoccupied with thinking of death or suicide or attempting suicide. It's very common. Okay, so now, Dr. Frampton or Sara?
Sara, please.
I was going to be talking to you about 504 and comparing them with IDEA.
Years ago, when I started teaching, 1967, I taught my first class. There were no rules around special needs children being able to go to school. Our class was in the basement of the school. I had 7 children. They came from the McGuffey School for the Retarded in Charlottesville, Virginia, and that was the name of the school, carved in stone, no less. And we were not allowed to have lunch or recess with any of the other kids in the school. And one day, the principal called the parent of one of my children named Charlie, he's a cute little blonde kid, and said, your kid can't come to school anymore because he doesn't fit. So that, we went from there in the 60s to finally the Rehab Act of 1973, which gave some entitlement. And I want to just talk to you a little bit about the difference here. It's very important. These are both civil rights laws. Yeah, I'm not, I don't do the slides or anything electronic, so if they don't.
You tell me and I'll change it over.
Yeah, okay. So what happened was, at first we started with, oh, everyone should have equal access. Everybody should be able to go to school at least. And then when they got all these kids in school, they realized they were very different. When I started school at the University of Virginia, there were 2 scholarships for something called learning disabilities. Myself and another boy, a guy, got those scholarships for 2 years graduate school. No one knew what learning disabilities was. Special ed had always been mental retardation, or kids that were not able to read, so they were mentally retarded. I mean, that's what it was. Or the orthopedically handicapped, which they assumed were mentally retarded. I mean, it was very provincial. So later on, Public Law 94-142 came about, and that is the precursor to IDEA and the precursor to IDEIA. I want you to understand that the 504 legislation is extremely different than IDEA. One of them is a law that gives equal access to anyone, anywhere. I've had 50-year-old adults come in my office that work for the city of San Diego saying, I need accommodations in the workplace because I have ADHD or I have organization issues, and I worked with them and got in meetings at their workplace. That's so that they can be on a level playing field with their work comrades. But the whole idea of legislation specifically related to special education students from 3 through 21 is that the students need specialized instruction or support services in order to learn. It's not equal access. So I hope that makes sense to everybody, so you get the essence of the difference. Now let me see, in terms of getting back to this. I wanted to go to comparison of Section 504 and IDEIA. Oh, and this family is wonderful. Good luck to you. Yes, so nice to meet you today.
So this is part of it.
This is it.
That's right there.
Where is this? Oh, where is this graph?
They have this graph.
Oh,
We have the bullets. The bullets there. So there you go.
Okay. So I think Rehab Act, ADA, 504, all talk about equal access for any institution that receives federal funds. So in other words, there are private schools and colleges that receive no federal funds. And basically they, especially even in a sports program or Title IX, they do not have to comply. But almost everybody in some form gets federal funds. And when an institution gets federal funds, they can't discriminate, and they should be able to give equal access to all. And we can talk a little bit about what that access is. But let's talk a little bit more about special education. To me, for a bipolar student, there are probably 3 main categories. I would consider that there are 14 handicapping conditions, but 3 main categories that most likely could be considered for a bipolar child.
And those are, I believe you guys have them at in the back of your packet.
We're trying to confuse you by seeing if you can find the correct place on the handout. There are 14 handicapping conditions, and among them are things like deafness, blindness, orthopedic. I had a girl once who couldn't get into special education. She lost her arm below, her arm and hand below here. And I went up to Orange County and sat in a meeting and said, have you ever heard of orthopedic impairment? you know, she can't use this arm to help button her coat or do some of the tasks in PE and whatnot, so I think we need an IEP. But the main ones for a bipolar child would be what's called ED, emotionally, behaviorally disturbed or impaired, other health impaired, which is for medical conditions, and specific learning disability. I'm going to just talk about those three mainly, but I'm certainly not saying that a student that would be bipolar wouldn't possibly be considered also under, for instance, speech and language impaired for pragmatic language issues or social language. Because many bipolar children don't have good social reciprocity. You know, we could call it a language problem or a lack of insight problem. ADHD children also have trouble with some language reciprocity because their processing is so fast. Emotionally disturbed children, to qualify under that handicapping condition, there are some qualifiers. I'm going to talk about these a little bit. In order to get an IEP, just be clear that you have to qualify under one of these handicapping conditions. It's not enough to get a note from a doctor who says, Johnny has bipolar and needs to get extra help in reading. If there's no impact at school, that if people are saying, gee, the report card is good, the social skills are okay, he's a little quiet, but we don't really see a problem, you know, it may be that the medication is supporting the student or that the symptoms are just not severe in that environment. It's going to be very difficult to get a school to say the child is needing an IEP. Because remember, an IEP means that the child has to have a condition that requires specialized instruction and support services. So if a child doesn't need that, they wouldn't just be getting an IEP because they had a medical diagnosis. The medical is a different issue. Under emotional disturbance, a student must exhibit characteristics for a long period of time, that can be 6 months or more, to a marked degree. That means not subtle. And the most important words that you're going to find all over in the law, adversely affect educational performance. That is the I word. What was the I word? Impact. Gotta be impact. You know, nothing worse than going through asking for an assessment, you put it in writing, you send it to the school, they give you an assessment plan, they take the 60 days, you go to your meeting, you think you're getting an IEP, and they say, well, you know, we see that the doctor says this, but really, we don't see an impact educationally in the classroom, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's hard for parents to get that. There are 5, after you get the 3 qualifiers for ED, there are 5 different areas that are looked at to be eligible as an emotionally disturbed child. Just remember what Marta told you characteristics of a bipolar child are, the kinds of manifestations that you get.
Oh, sure. I'm going to see if I can pull this up.
Oh, that's okay. Inability to learn. All right. Now, ever hear someone say, oh, this kid's so poorly motivated? I just placed this child, I think it's today, in a residential placement in Tucson, who is bipolar, and high school, getting all Fs, and the staff's reports all were poorly motivated. Well, you know, let's really look at poorly motivated. The kid feels terrible about himself. He's threatened suicide. He has sabotaged efforts to help him in school. He's used substances. You know, all the symptoms are there of not functioning well, but the school doesn't see it. They don't see that first prong, inability to learn, may be more complicated, just the words poorly motivated. You have to look beyond words. When you start getting poorly motivated, you need to start talking about where that's coming from. The second area is interpersonal relationships. Now, this very often gets confused with spectrum kids. Are the kids able to form good relationships with peers or teachers? So I think, you know, we need to realize that, and I've had a lot of arguments about this with people, They didn't want to do autism as a handicapping condition, and they said, well, it's probably ED because interpersonal relationships aren't impaired. But you have to look again at the quality of the interpersonal relationship of an emotionally disturbed child as opposed to an autistic spectrum child. So a good psychologist should be hopefully able to get that. How about inappropriate types of behavior or feeling under normal circumstances? What does that mean? Last night, our little dachshund went out in the yard and a coyote got it and killed it. My husband found the body and he was terrified, upset, felt awful, came in, cried with the poor dog, little dog. And, you know, I mean, all day and last night, it was very hard for him. I feel so bad, but on the other hand, I know that in a few days or a week or a month, we'll have that discussion about, let's find another dog, and, you know, we'll get past that. But there are kids and people that can't let something go. They perseverate or become obsessed with it. And that's inappropriate behavior under fairly normal circumstances. I mean, you all know that, you know, laughing too much or crying too much or a 7-year-old saying, I want to kill myself is not appropriate. But I'm just saying, you know, we all have, you know, certain kinds of really being upset that's okay because the situation would, yeah, call for it. And then there's what's too much. And in all of our eyes, you know, we have to make a decision, and within the ED criteria, we look at that. Pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, no-brainer, we all know what depression is. And developing physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. What's the fear? Oh, I've had kids just obsessively afraid of things, thunderstorms, spiders, or school. School avoidance and school phobia fall under this last one. I mean, I've had kids that have been at home for a year where the school said, it doesn't belong in special education, you know, and we're starting to take a look at why is that kid home for a year? Why does it take some girl, I had a girl about a year and a half ago, we sent her to residential placement in Wisconsin. It was taking her 3 to 4 hours in the morning to get ready to go to school, which was across the street from her house. And then a half an hour to 45 minutes to slide along the side of her house and be able to cross the street and go over into the school. She had been there a year and a quarter and had 1 credit, 1 high school credit. So, I mean, I would say that's a pretty disturbed kid manifesting a lot of school avoidance.
And Sarah, if I can step in here. As a teacher, I know that I observe students in the classroom that, you know, maybe were lying down on the desk. I mean, they're laying over, or they just didn't seem like the other kids. You know, there weren't times when they were happy or getting along with other friends. They were often alone. And you want to, when you're talking to the staff and you're at meetings, you want to ask, you know, what have you observed? And ask for them not to describe what they're seeing. How does, you know, is this child sitting up, or are, you know, are they walking around? Are they hunched over? And so that's all evidence of some of these behaviors.
Many school staff persons are so overwhelmed because they're working harder, not getting paid anymore, and stressed. So they're maybe not paying the attention to certain symptoms that we would like for them to. One other thing I need to point out about some of the handicapping conditions, they have to be seen in all settings, home, school, community. When I have a teacher who says this child's emotionally disturbed, and the parents say, well, the child seems fine at, you know, Little League ball, and we don't have trouble with him at home, we're not seeing it in all settings. Conversely, if a parent says, oh my goodness, this kid is driving me crazy, he's defiant, he is impossible, and the staff is saying, well, look, his grades are pretty good, you know, he's behaving okay here, he's eating with other kids at lunch, he's not isolated, that's the I word. There's no impact yet at school. Now, I just placed a bipolar child a week ago, a girl, in a residential program up in Northern California. And the school district supported that. She'd been diagnosed as bipolar for years, but it wasn't until like 9th grade, 8th grade, that things really started to fall apart in the school environment. They had always been really bad at home. And what happened was she went to her school counselor and said, some of the kids are giving me a hard time, and I wanted to kill myself. And when the counselor, a school counselor is required to make an inquiry about that, to assess for suicidality. And she had a plan. And so the counselor called the police, and the police took her to the hospital. And of course, then she wanted to kill the counselor. She's a really nice girl. I mean, she was just so agitated by having, the things she said called out. We changed her handicapping condition to emotionally disturbed when we got more information that this was starting to carry over into the community and into school. But with bipolar, it's a condition at age that does change. And sometimes all the symptoms don't become florid or clear until middle adolescence. I have another one in the hospital I went to see yesterday, a girl 17, and I see psychotic symptoms with her also. I haven't seen that too much, as she's smart and wonderful, pretty, bright, but there's such distortions of thinking that, we really would say there's some thought problems. I can't get her an IEP. She has no IEP. The school says, oh, her grades are good. Well, we're going to deal with that Monday out there meeting. But, I just want,
can we ask questions?
Sure.
I tried to keep my son's category as other health impaired for as long as I could. But then there came a time they said that he needs to be classified as emotionally disturbed to get more services. And I've always felt that's going to be a negative label. What are the consequences of that label? Does that follow him through middle school and high school? Does it make him ineligible to
be in the
take some
military?
jobs?
Be in the military. I think that there is much more of a negative impact with that label of ED. But when they say more services, honestly, I do play the services game too with autism, and that's why I think a lot of school people are really afraid of the term autism. Every case is a little different, and the needs of every child, so sometimes they want, in this state, in the past, we have not been able to get residential treatment center funding for students that didn't have an ED label. And it's usually pretty clear when students need that, when they're really falling apart in all environments. So that may be a time that would trigger somebody to say, well, we should change handicapping condition. That's just a general comment. But I do want you to hear that those symptoms have to be seen in all settings. So if somebody's saying we're not seeing it at home, or a teacher's saying I'm not seeing it at school, we may, either the teacher's a poor reporter, or not having the child enough to be exposed, or else it's just not manifesting at school. But parents can be poor reporters too, because I've had parents to be not in denial, but not realize how severe. I mean, I've had kids push parents around, break things, tear houses apart, and the parents just kind of are in shell shock, and they kind of go on because they don't realize how serious that is.
Well, I have a question that's connected to this, because our daughter, who's going to be 15 this month, and she's bipolar, etc., she often does way better in school than at home, and partly because they don't challenge her sufficiently academically, so she skates by, she's really smart, they don't expect her to do homework, they don't have expectations, and they don't challenge her behaviorally if she does something that they're kind of, and this has been in several schools, and she's right now in day treatment. And so they say, she's doing fine, she doesn't need to be somewhere, she's doing fine. So that's because you're not giving her homework, she's not doing 9th grade work. If you expect her to do 9th grade work, she's going to melt down. So they seem to have an interest in keeping her where she is and say, everything's okay, we're handling it. But they're not, because if they ask, my son is in 6th grade, my daughter's in 9th, he does more homework than my daughter does, she would be melting down.
Well, there is a phenomenon of a shortage of money. And if you have a problem and someone's responsible and you take that, like, I have a cavity, Dad, I need to go to the dentist. someone's going to have to pay to have that cavity taken care of. And I think that many programs right now are probably under-referring for level of treatment because it's a huge financial impact. I mean, I started all of this, decades ago, and we didn't have the degree of severity of some of the problems that kids have now. It's expensive to address those, and parents don't have the resources because the economy is poor. I see many parents that 10 years or 5 years ago might have, that right now are saying, what can the system do for my child because I don't have any money, I can't do it myself. So I suspect that there's a minimization of symptoms because by saying that the symptoms really have impact, remember I word, more impact, and that program can't handle the child, they're then obligated to do the next step. You know, you have residential placements that can be $200,000 or $300,000. I'm not saying all of them, but I mean, there's some very expensive. I'm getting ready to make a placement for a kid that's $250,000 a year. You know, she cannot, there's no place else she can go. It's a combination of residential treatment center and hospital, so it's like hospital type cost. But that could be a reason. When you have questions like that, you should ask them for an IEE. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Other health impaired is limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to chronic or acute health problems. And that adversely affects educational performance. That's the impact word. So ADHD, you can bring a prescription saying, my doctor says my child has ADHD, and if they don't see the impact in the classroom or minimize that, then you may not get the intervention that you want, or they'll lie you off with a 504. And Rick said, well, we're not going to do an IEP, but we'll give you 504. Specific learning disability. I'm just going to touch on this because most of the schools are trying to do what's called RTI. Do you know what that is? It's response to instruction. So here's the idea. You have trouble getting your letters. So I'm going to do a special lesson with you every day until you get all 26 of your letters. However, and I might pick a group of 5. If one of those can't get it, then I'll say I'll work with that child one-to-one for a few weeks. If the child still doesn't get it, I mean, that's response. The child can't respond. And so therefore you don't assess for special ed. You go through weeks of response to, is it intervention, instruction? Right. You do weeks of that, and that can stall off doing the special ed eval. But it is one way to diagnose learning disabilities, and some districts use only that. They don't use a discrepancy formula. You've always heard with severe or specific learning disabilities, there has to be a severe discrepancy. So IQ needs to be up here and maybe 22.5 points to be in 8 different areas. Academic areas like reading fluency, reading comprehension, writing, etc. We have these on slides, so you should have this. But
and I think that Ashley can forward it to
Okay.
them. I thought it was going to be attached to the back. But
Okay.
you can forward it.
So for a learning disability, which a bipolar child probably, many of my bipolar kids have trouble with writing. And that is the highest form of communication. I mean, writing is harder than just talking. But many of them seem to have that visual motor integration piece. There has to be a processing problem. Here's processing. Auditory processing, visual processing, attention. ADHD, attention can be one of the processing disorders that could show you that it's a learning disability. And it has to occur in one of these 8 different areas, like math, calculation, writing, several areas of reading, whatnot. So there's a recipe to establish learning disability. You can do it by the discrepancy formula, discrepancy between cognitive ability and achievement, or response to intervention or instruction. You can do a combination of those. Now, it's a very handy thing to know about option C. Anybody know option C? If anybody ever assesses your child, for one thing you need to make sure they assess in all areas of suspected disability. And for pity's sake, they need to look at all 14 handicapping conditions. All right, I agree. Deaf, blind, orthopedic handicap, that's pretty clear. But I have one district in this county that they'll pick a handicapping condition to assess for, and they'll only do that. So they'll assess for learning disabilities. Okay, well, in their assessment, what we see is ADHD, other health impairment, but they didn't assess for that. So they aren't going to talk about that at that meeting. So then you have to ask for another assessment. Would you please assess and see if the child might be ADHD? The second assessment comes up. By this time, the child is emotionally disturbed. We can't talk about that. We assess for OHI. And again, we assess for LD. And the child's not LD, and now the child's not OHI. And that's the child who it went today, bipolar, high school boy, to residential placement. Okay. I mean, we'll go after funding. But if your child is going to be tested, say, I want you to look at everything one time. These kids hate testing anyway. Yeah.
Would this also apply to triennial assessments, or only with an original assessment to determine if there's any definition around?
When you are admitted to special education, the assessment is done, reassessment is done every 3 years. That reassessment is to establish eligibility all over again. Now, to me, as a school psychologist who worked in San Diego Unified and was president of the County School Psych Association, to me it would seem that if we're looking at eligibility, you would be looking at everything. Well, we know we don't need to look at deaf, blind, orthopedic handicap. I mean, there are certain things we don't need to look at. Mental retardation, probably, if it hasn't ever been identified. But the biggies, specific learning disability, specific language impairment or SLI, so the speech and language impairments, the attentional, the emotional. Many things start out looking pretty benign at 7 and 8, but by 15, they can be different. Of course they should look at everything. Don't just look at what you've done, but look at the whole child. I mean, isn't that what we want? Yeah. So, and actually, that's required in the law. So I'm not going to go into any more of that stuff. We'll go on into who it serves. The Rehab Act, ADA, serves everybody, and it serves people who might have limitations on activities such as learning, breathing, walking, sleeping, any limitations. But the IDEA really looks at children 3 through 21 whose disability impacts or adversely affects educational performance. Right. I'm not going to belabor that anymore, and I think I'm going to skip some of this because I told you already, just because a student has a medical diagnosis doesn't mean that you have impact and the student will be eligible. A 504 plan is the tool of ADA, the vehicle through which you provide equal playing field. And what would it have? Things like extended time, maybe, or preferential seating, or maybe an extra 7 notes that somebody else does because they don't write well. But if the writing is impaired enough, or if auditory processing means they can't listen and take notes and they need training, we jump over to special ed eligibility because they need some specialized training so that they can fulfill their potential. An IEP is, yeah.
Do you know of any bipolar that actually a 504 works? I mean, would that be someone like well stabilized on their medication?
How about someone who's not identified? There are a lot of non-identified bipolar people that if you're, probably this group is very well informed, but you may meet or watch or work with someone that you say, whew, they need to get some medication or diagnosis or something, or avoid, or in your family. Oh, that's a great source. they're mild, they're not identified or they don't want to be identified, and so they might have a 504 because it's being superficially handled or they're not complaining, or they're very bright and it doesn't show that much, or they're young and we haven't seen it all yet. So yeah, I mean, I think that they're sleepers out there, that it's coming along. And I find that as individuals get older, like their 30s and 40s, usually they know how to learn. They learn mostly more how to manage their symptoms. So an equal access tool like 504 might be adequate. They might need a little more time off, or they may have a special arrangement with their employer if they're having a hard time. So anyway, the IDEA, it covers students from 3 through 21. However, if a student graduates, and you'll see the schools race to graduation, they are no longer eligible for any special ed services the day they receive a diploma. If they receive a certificate of completion, they're eligible till they're 22. So everybody's clear on that. Funding, 504 plans and 504 services receive no federal funding, but IDEA students do receive, the states do receive in the districts extra money for their special ed population. So you think that the districts will like everybody to be on an IEP because they have special funding, but I believe there's a ceiling that is dependent on how many they had identified the previous year, ceiling of that, on how much they can receive for funding. For a 504, evaluation can be based on a variety of sources. A group makes a decision. You don't have to do testing. They can consider just oral information. For an IEP, there has to be a full evaluation with assessment tools and strategies to take a look at information. A 504 does require a yearly reevaluation and periodic review. An IEP requires a 3 or triennial review. Now, you can ask for an independent evaluation. Let's say you go to a meeting and your child has a 504 plan. You can ask them, they say, well, your child's not eligible. Say, well, I need another opinion. I want another opinion. You can ask for another opinion and have some more testing done, or somebody else come in, but you have to pay for that with a 504. However, with an IEP, you can ask for an IEE, meaning that you want an assessor that is separate from the district, in private practice, or entirely removed from a district or that district, to come in and assess, and you want the district to fund. If the district doesn't agree with your request for an IEE, the only thing they can do is either take you to due process for asking to show that their assessment is appropriate, or go ahead and fund it. And even though they give you a list and say, pick off our list, you don't have to pick off their list. You can pick someone else. But that person has to perform the IEE according to the state guidelines, the Ed Code guidelines. And the state's more specific than the federal. So for instance, I have a school district in North County that decided they were doing an IEE as part of a settlement agreement with the attorney that I usually use. And they agreed to do it, but they told the family that they wouldn't allow the IEE assessor to come to the meeting to discuss their results. Oh, what we're going to do is they'll send a report to me, the psychologist, and I'll interpret it for them. Well, the parents said no. But you want to know something? They can do that, because I understand that in the law, and I'm not an attorney, so this is a disclaimer for Amy there, that anyone on the team that's qualified can interpret the assessment report. It doesn't have to be the one who did the actual assessment. I don't believe it should apply with an IEE, because if you didn't agree with that psychologist, and then you're bringing your person or your person's report in, you don't want that psychologist interpreting somebody else's data, because you didn't like them in the first place. You didn't feel comfortable with it. Yeah.
Once you go through that process and you get the IEE, from my understanding, and I'm wondering if this is correct, that the district does not have to take in consideration the results of the assessment.
They always take into consideration. They don't have to accept it.
Yes, that's what I meant, yes.
When I have had IEEs done, the district funded, the assessor came, talked about the results, and they ignored it. Went on. So, for instance, I asked for a developmental vision eval for a little boy that had horrible vision issues identified by their own team, the psychologist and whatnot. When we went to the meeting, I said, my goodness, look at these scores. These are so bad. We really need to have somebody take a look at this. So they said, oh, we got just the guy. So they sent us this optometrist, doesn't do developmental vision. And the optometrist was told by the district, we'll pay you. And when the mother came in and said, I want a developmental vision eval, he said, I don't do that. I don't know anything about that. You know, you're going to have to, so he calls the director in the district, and the director says, all right, you can have the one you wanted. I wanted somebody else. So he said, okay. That guy did the assessment. They paid him. He came to the meeting. He said, wow, I see all of these things. It's just like what the school psychologist and the teacher thought. This kid's really in trouble. He needs some vision therapy. And they said, oh, thanks for your opinion. See ya. Got me to stay for the whole meeting. Okay. And it was over. They still didn't do anything.
Well, I have a question about this, especially now that we don't have county mental health overseeing things as the 80, 27, 26 assessors. We're in this position now where the school that my daughter's at, the day treatment, they're the ones who are assessing her, and her case manager is her teacher, and it's all in-house, and there's nobody looking over what the school's doing. They're their own kingdom. So what, is there any remedy to
It's
that?
chaotic in the state since Schwarzenegger, Brown, I forget, it's Brown, one of them, it was right at the time Brown came in, and I don't remember who, they line-itemed it out, CMH. And that was litigated over the summer, and so most of the districts had made their own contracts.
And there's no oversight for them, it seems.
Well, I don't know what district you're in. Yeah, I mean, certainly there isn't an outside agency. Now, till June, there is an agreement between county mental health and some of the districts, but some of the districts already bailed from that, and they're doing their own thing. And I don't know where you are, but there's always a way to deal with every problem. Okay. But I hear that, and they're trying to get things in place. But when you don't like the answer, what you need to do is figure out what is the right question. Who should be asking that question? Because you may need some help.
Sara, can I just add to that?
Sure.
The other thing is that you always have to have evidence for everything. And what I do when I'm going through all of the reports that I'm reading when I'm on a case is I always look for evidence in the materials that I get from the district. So that if I have evidence in their words, in their documentation that this is the case, and they don't want to validate that, well, help me understand what's going on then. If this is what you said, this is what you've observed. So that's what's so important about, the right questions and going through your documents thoroughly and having the evidence to back up what you believe to be true in their documentation.
And tape record every meeting. Send something saying, we want to tape record this in every future meeting for our child. Whether it's a 504 meeting or an IEP, you need to send that in a day ahead. Okay, was there another question? Yes.
No, I'd like to learn about placement options, because, in our IEP meetings, they put, they're the ones that inform us of the placement options, and I try to learn options outside of the meeting, and I learn often from other parents what they've been able to get. And then the IEP team never offers those placement options. So my 9-year-old son is in day treatment. I don't know if it's the best placement. I've heard of regional STEAS programs. I've heard of private school placements. I've heard of non-public school placements. I've heard of AB 2726, which that's the category that he fell under to get the day treatment. But what are all of those? And I've also tried to look for a list of options I want to investigate those options myself.
So
and make that decision.
Options, giving a continuum of options of being available is required of every district. That doesn't mean that every district has to have an identical, or that doesn't mean for every child that the continuum of options for that child has to be the same as for another child. So if you hear one child say at the Winston School and you're thinking, oh, at the meeting I'm going to bring up the Winston School because I heard that this was really good, the staff there may be feeling that for your child that that's not an option that should be on the continuum. That's part of what may be happening. They're going to be looking at your child to say, what are the options there? There's another piece of this. If I say to my husband, do you want steak or pheasant for dinner? In addition to the fact I don't cook pheasant. If you want steak or pheasant, I better be able to produce steak or pheasant. So I'm not going to give him those options. You want turkey burgers? Or, I have turkey burgers, I can do that. So you offer options that you're allowed to offer, or that are within your district and you aren't going to get a lot of flack for. What you're asking for are options that are perhaps, and they'll say, oh, that's so restrictive. Oh my goodness, there are no two little kids there, and but you're asking for them to discuss some options which aren't on the table or which they have not put on the table, and they may get in trouble for doing that. Now that's not a good reason. I bring it in myself, but they know me. So I would say, I think that there are a few things we've missed here. If they don't offer my option, I can give them notice. And we could talk about giving notice, and I'll go look at my own options. But it's very hard for a parent to really know if an option is good for their child. I mean, you can think it looks good, but really you need a professional to help you make that decision usually.
Well, isn't there, for a parent that can't afford financially to hire an advocate, to sit in this
Right.
IEP team meeting, that would be wonderful, but it's not an option financially. That there must be some resources that the parent can read through to see, would Winston School be an option?
But here again, what you're saying is you decide. And I'm not saying an advocate. You don't need an advocate. What you need is a professional in the field who knows your child, who will be honest. Do you know what I did yesterday? I went to see a kid in the hospital who's bipolar who needs placement. The psychologist confided to me that he had taken his information to the district director and been told by the director and the program specialist he was not allowed to certify that child as special ed. That he had to write a report saying the child wasn't eligible. Now, he told me that because he's my friend, and he trusts me, that I won't say anything. And that's fine, I'll deal with it. I already called the director, and I'll deal with it in a different way. I had to go out and find people that had treated this girl in the hospital 10 times, very, very impaired, that would be willing to say something in writing that the child needs residential treatment. So the first person I call is the psychiatrist who's treated this girl through the 10 hospitalizations. He's been her psychiatrist forever. And I said, the grandparents were there. I said, hello, doctor. This is Sara Frampton. I do educational stuff. I didn't know if he knew who I was. And I said, I understand you recommended that this girl needs a residential treatment. So he said, oh, residential treatment? I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Why, who would pay for that? And then there was total denial. I had to go knock on a bunch of other doors to try to find an MD, a therapist, who would say that. But the best people that could tell you what your child needs, and I did. I was able to get some letters, and they know where that's going to go. But, they're willing to take a stand. There's got to be someone in your child's world that you could pull aside and say, tell me really what would be best. The hard piece of that is without exposing that person, going back to your IEP team and saying, I understand that there are people involved with my child who thinks that would be appropriate. I would like to go take a look at that. Would someone here be willing to go with me? I would like that option to be considered as an option for my child.
I have a partial answer for you, or help. I found, first of all, Muffy Walker, an international bipolar foundation, you have a question about a school or what are some options for my child. She will put the question out to the whole, this is one of the most amazing things that Muffy does. She'll put the question out to everybody and come out with some answers of options for things, or if you've heard of a school, do you know anybody who's been there? Also NAMI, are you familiar with NAMI? And I went through like an 8-week series of classes, and it wasn't just the classes on dealing with your child with mental illness, but the resources among the parents and finding out where did your kid go and how did you find it out, what is it like, and then visiting the schools. Because the school district isn't going to tell you everything.
Well,
It's not
but
there
let
yet.
me say again, and I want to be really careful about this. In my practice, and I've done this for 30 years, and I worked in the schools before that, we will not make a recommendation for a child until we screen the child in our office and look at the records so we see that child ourselves. It's not really credible to hold people that don't have contact with your child and work with your child and also know the placement. It's just really, really important that, and that's why I'm saying try to find someone in that child's constellation who will, even off the record, give you some honest information. Parents come in all the time and say, what do you think my child needs? I said, I don't know, I need to see your child first. We're all, so that's just my only warning. I think people are well-intentioned who talk about schools, but I think it's very hard to match a child in a school when you're not, in the field. But if you have someone that's whispering to you under the table, Winston, then, go for that. Take your child out, do some trial days at Winston, take a look at that, go back to your IEP team and say, I want you to consider that. That's very important for me. So that's just, yeah.
What would you say, let's say the parents, when the district is saying, well, we have the right to use our programs, starting
First,
these restrictive
right.
and then going up before we would be willing to pay.
I'd
If
say
those
this,
other more
that every IEP, because we're talking here IEPs, not 504s, is based on individualized and unique needs. And I have had a child that was never in special ed, never had a 504, and the least restrictive environment was residential placement in Utah.
Wow.
I mean, we do have that.
Right.
Because, they can say, and that's what we're supposed to do, is not pull kids out of being with a mainstream situation until we at least give it a try. It's the concept of response to intervention or instruction. Let's try some lower level things first before we jump to that. But you have to take into account where that particular child is. So don't ever tell me there's a hoop to jump through, because there'll be a child come along that doesn't or shouldn't jump through that hoop. That it would be more damaging for the child to try all those interim things than to just go into a placement that you know would work. It just is very individual, but you have to make your case, and Marta was saying that, you have to provide the evidence, build your case. But if anybody says, oh, I love it. I love two things that they say in IPDs. One is the law says, oh, yes, tell me what the law says. I always am interested in hearing, unless there's an attorney there. And then if there's an attorney there, that's okay. And then people, and I just lost my thought, the other thing that, they say, oh, we always do this. Or all our kids have to go to that special day class before we can move on to non-public. But it isn't true, because there are always reasons why, for your particular child, it's really important that we move into a different kind of a setting. And that's what you want to get that team to focus on. Remember that they're instructed how to respond.
Well, I don't think they would offer private school education.
They don't offer.
They would never offer, the district wouldn't.
Well, let's say I want
As an
private
option.
school education.
I
Or
don't
one
even
of
know.
my kids in your district, whatever district that is. What I would do is look at what they have. We always go look. If they say, oh, we want you to go look, we have this new class over here. Great, no problem. We'll go look. We'll come back to a meeting. We'll tell them it doesn't work. This isn't going to work for this kid. And here are the reasons. Just something simple. A little girl, class is 8 boys. You can't put a little girl in a class of 8 boys that are 11 and 12 years old, or whatever. You have to go take a look. You'd be surprised when you go look at the things you'll find that don't seem to fit. Or the teacher will tell you, this is a good one, off the record, oh my goodness, I am so busy here, my class is like past full, I can't take any more. Please don't put your kid in here. I love that. That's, you know. The best way to go in and do an observation is wear pink ruffles, tennis shoes, a visor hat, chew gum, and don't look like you're very alert. I always used to be able to go undercover somewhere. I lost the ability to do that. But just go in and just talk to people just like everyday people. Don't come across like, you know everything or whatever. And just try to get them to tell you how their everyday life in that class is or that program, what's really going on there. The best story I ever had about observations to see about putting a kid in a program, I went in Winston for a boy who was dyslexic. And they had a class at this little East County district. And I sat and observed in the class. There was a neuropsych that had been there the day before and observed. That tested the boy, and we're getting ready to really go to the mat for this kid. And I was about 45 minutes into the observation, which was supposed to be like an hour. And it was very dull, nothing going on, honestly, a yawner. All of a sudden, double doors burst open at the side of the room as a huge kid runs in the room, runs around, knocks over desks, acts crazy, pats a teacher on the back, and they drag him out of the class. The janitor. Now, I had seen the kid with a janitor. I didn't really get what was happening. So the janitor took the kid, and I observed a little bit more and saw the kid with the janitor walking around the school. So I compared notes with a neuropsych, and he said, well, you know, the day before, I was in that class, and I saw that kid with the janitor also. As I was leaving the campus, I heard a teacher aide say, or I asked her, I said, who is that kid that came in question? Oh, it's one of the kids in here, but when they were having observers come for a couple of days, they decided to put him with the janitor so that when the observers came, they wouldn't see the kid. So we went to due process, and in the mediation, the mediator, I told the mediator what had happened, what that person had told me, and he called the superintendent out of his office into the hall and said, now, I want you to tell this guy. He's retired now. He's a great guy. I really like him. And he heard that story, and oh my goodness. In addition to the fact my child started at Winston the next Monday and was able to finish and graduate there, and that was an elementary district, so he was there a long time. You know, he apologized to the family for having that happen. It was, so people will do things because they think they're being helpful and they want to, you know, they're being told, you know, hold the lid on costs, but it's really good when you go in to observe anyway to try to be really low-key.
Can I just ask for clarification? When you're saying going in to observe, you're saying going in to observe the recommended placement for your child?
Well, it can be going in to observe anything. If you don't like your child's placement, you better go in and observe the class the child's
right,
in.
But you're not saying like, so if she wants her child to go to Winston or...
What I would say, you go to the meeting and they say, we have a great class at Bernie. We want you to go look at that because we think it's perfect for your child. Say, sure, I'll go. Go a few times. And then my husband will go. He can go a few times. And my girlfriend, my grandmother will all go. And then you go back to the meeting and say, you know what, that's really not going to work. But I also went to Winston, and I did a couple trial days there. And that does work. So let's talk about my option. Always, when they say we have options to offer, they have to make a specific offer. They can't just say, we have SAI classes in 40 schools, and you can pick any of them. You know, that's not an offer of FAPE, you know, FAPE, free and appropriate public education. An offer of FAPE is specific. But I always smile when I'm not getting what I want and say, sure, you know, we'll take a look at your program. Oh, my parents will be fine with it. And then I say, go take several samples of behavior, go at different times of day, and take notes and have other people go. You know, don't everybody go together. I like you to go at 8:15 in the morning, kids are fresh, no behavior clubs. And tell you the best time to do an observation. Go right before lunch, that half hour, or the last half hour of the day. Quickly going through this, placement decisions for a 504 are made by a team. Under IDEA, they're made by the team, usually that generated the evaluation data. And they talk about the continuum of options and or placements and services available. 504 requires the child to receive a FAPE with non-disabled peers. IDEA does, and I want you to hear that. The 504 Rehab Act of 1973 ADA implies mainstream. You're accommodating the special needs to the mainstream, not special ed. That can go all the way from the mainstream to a state hospital, or we have a state school for the deaf and a state school for the blind, or residential treatment. You can change a 504, they can change placement or write up a 504 without you even being there. A lot of times you go sit and have a meeting, they might take a few notes and give you some rights, but they'll send it to you in the mail and everyone doesn't even have to sign. I mean, I've had those before. IEP meetings, they have to have before any change of placement is made. I'm going to go through some modifications here, things like tape recorders, spell checkers, calculators, computers, anything that can be a modification or a support on a 504 can also be in an IEP as an accommodation or used for the specialized instruction.
I wanted to share these with you. These are two resources that I found. They're accommodating students with mood lability, so depression and bipolar disorder. This is written more to address IDEA, and it has awesome recommendations, really great recommendations for accommodations, and not really modifications, and I'll tell you why. I was studying it, as you can see, but it has wonderful ideas, and I suggest that you have this, that you go through it, and you can always take resources to your meetings and share them, and oftentimes the school's really happy. The other one I have, and so I think actually you're going to be sending that to them, as well as the description of the 3 qualifying conditions. The other one is for students that are going into college, but this one really, so the accommodations that are listed here are much more appropriate for a 504, even if they're still in elementary school or high school, junior, middle school. But they are, these are 2 wonderful resources, and I really like this. In this one it says, what limitations does the student experience? Which goes back to what Sara was saying, what is the impact? So you, as you're preparing to go to your IEP meeting or to a 504 meeting, that's a really important question to consider. What limitations does the student experience? And those are the accommodations that you want that will address and help them overcome those limitations. So this is a wonderful resource as well, and I don't know if the slide is missing there, but anyways, these 2 will be sent to you if you're interested in having them, and they're really wonderful resources.
What about a person who is diagnosed at 20, 21 years old, is in college, might have to take a little time off, go back to college, and they're not in that category of 3 to 21. That would come into
Yes,
that.
they still qualify for a 504. You don't. 3 to 21 is for an IEP.
Okay.
But the Disability Services Office at the college can provide a 504, and they will write up accommodations. And this is a wonderful resource.
Do they need to assess the student?
Some of them will. Some of them will want that. A lot of them will want certain testing or a letter or having a private psychologist or something like that.
There was one, let me just mention, one of the accommodations they had here for a college student was, for example, in the dorm. If a student is diagnosed bipolar, you could request in housing that they have a dorm for themselves and only pay for 1 student instead of the shared cost because of the sleep disturbance and the different hours. So that might be something that you can request. So it has wonderful ideas in here.
Yeah, another one, a friend of mine has a freshman in college, and she has some, she's labeled as ADD,
Absolutely.
population. So,
Usually special ed kids get preferential registration in high school and college, when they're identified and they have help from the counselor. Let me finish. I only have a little bit more to do. It's my OCD. Procedural safeguards. With a 504, they have to give you notice before they make a change in placement. With an IEP, they have to give you written notice before identification, evaluation, or placement. And they also have to give written notice, before any changes. Due process, there's a grievance procedure for a 504, and as you know, there is a set of due process procedures for an IEP. They're a little bit different if a parent files than if a school files. For a parent, they have what's called a resolution meeting, which is very close after the time you file, I think 2 weeks, and that's very informal. But the mediation levels, they have judges come from OAH, Office of Administrative Hearings in Sacramento, does the hearings, and then they have judges do the due processes. There are no compensatory damages in special education, IDEA, but with 504, they have 1984 damages, right? So there are compensatory damages. So if you hear of a kid with an IEP and something's happened, there was a case in Nevada where a teacher force-fed an autistic kid and made him vomit and then got mad and, was really abusive. The kid had an IEP, but the parents filed damages under 1984 damages because the child obviously was also 504 eligible and prevailed. It was a really good Ninth Circuit decision. That's our presentation, except probably I talked over Martin. She didn't have a chance to say everything she wanted.
Procedural safeguards, well, we also have those, and you receive those at every meeting, but I think this is a simplified version that we're going to have sent to you as well. There's a link for that. And there are some additional special education resources that Sara had copied off, and there's a nice list of resources as well in the back of this packet. So they're both very useful.
Are there other questions?
So first of all, I have to say, we have tremendously benefited from your services. We've been working with Nancy at your office, so we can't thank you enough.
You have no idea. She's saved me a lot of times. Nancy never gets upset, and she has such good advice.
So she's really, really helped us. It turns out that as of next month, 3 of our 4 kids actually are going to have IEPs. And in some ways, I credit Nancy's work because she took on the most difficult of the issues, and after resolving it, which I do have questions about, the school very quickly and on their own came to us for the other 2 kids. One is just what has a little bit of a speech impediment that was handed to me. We did the IEP, that was easy. The other was SST, that at the SST we requested an IEP, and there was no argument, no issue. So I believe that Nancy laid the groundwork for us to make it very easy.
Here's what happens. When there's a troublemaker, they try to do damage control. So what I'm saying to you right there, when you say, I can't afford, what you need to think about is the years that your child will lose and while you're scrambling around trying to figure it out. And if you make a stink one time, I mean a big stink, even if you do it by yourself and don't hire somebody, go to TAS or go to Compass or go someplace where there are free services or low cost like LDA. I mean, a lot of great folks there that try to help. Once you make a big stink, oh my goodness, you become one of those high-profile cases that they just don't want to deal with you. I have to laugh. I was talking to a program specialist today at a school where I was doing a meeting in North County, and they're all changing jobs in that school district because somebody retires, so everyone's moving in. And I was saying, well, what you're going to be doing and what. What he said is, well, we're all of us administratively, they're living around, are keeping our high-profile cases. Our high-profile cases, what do you think those are? They're with people like you who come to meetings like this and get informed, and then you go in and say, wait a minute now, that's not working for me, I want to talk about Winston School. You know, and you don't stop there. You know, maybe you don't have money, but you can read the rights and you can see where to file, and you know, send that letter in. You know, I would get, what I say to my parents is, bring your grandmother, your mother, your neighbors, whoever makes you feel better. If we have 10 people, that's fine. And if you file for due process, bring them all and tell your story. You know, they're going to sit and look at you and say, oh my goodness, how do we get past her? But I'll tell you, the squeaky wheels really get the oil, I think.
Okay, I have a question.
And you don't have to have a professional help you to do that. Okay.
Okay, my son, who's 11, 6th grade, we just found out last year he has ADHD, and they gave him a 504, which doesn't seem to be helping. I've been wondering how, I suspect he has learning disabilities, which lead to him putting his head down on the table all the time, saying it's too hard, I can't do it, I'm stupid. And they're saying, no, there's nothing, he does fine in the STAR testing. And so I don't have anything specific to.
So here's what I would ask
how to
you.
get it tested or.
If you were sitting in my office, how's he doing on his grades?
His grades are so, he gets sometimes B's, sometimes D's, he's inconsistent, but he gets emotionally all melted down, just straining to do that.
At school?
No, more at home than at school. At school, he kind of is under the radar, like 35 kids in the class.
6th grade?
Yeah.
Wait a few years. If you don't want to wait a few years,
I
you
know.
go in and observe. So you call the principal and say, I want to observe in this class. And you go in and observe, and you take a notebook. You wear a black suit. Everyone needs to have an IEP suit and a white blouse. See, if you wear navy, then that's friendly. If you wear black, if I wear black to a meeting, they can count on the fact it's not going to be nice. So you go in and you wear your black IEP suit and you sit and you take notes, and they'll shoo you out after a few minutes because they don't want you to be there too long, and say, well, I didn't get to see everything. I need to come back at a different time of day and do 10 observations. You don't need to be looking for anything. You're a mother. You go in and sit. They're going to begin talking about you in the teacher's room. What is wrong with her? You know, she's not. Call a meeting and complain.
But what I'm wondering then is, do I need to have something like, do I need to be able to suspect, oh, he has a processing problem or this or
No.
that, or do I
You
need to
tell
be
them
tested?
something's wrong. I need you to assess it. And you know what?
They've said no.
Okay, that's fine. You write them a letter and say, I understand you won't assess my child. I'm going to have my child assessed privately. I'll be back with a bill.
Do you have?
Wait a minute, listen to me. You come back with a bill and your report. You call a meeting, you have the person who assessed come to the meeting, and you have them talk about what they found. Now, if they say, gee, we think he's doing okay, then, you know, you don't really have an issue. But if they identify some things, then at the end, after they come into the meeting, you hand them the bill and say, now I want an assessment, by the way, pay for this.
Well, I asked my son's pediatrician, can you do any kind of screening, or do you recommend, do you know any people who do this type of educational screening? And she just said, bring him into the office, she'll check him. But I'm not sure what she can do. Are there companies or people that you recommend to do educational testing? Or
Your school, why go pay somebody?
because I might trust them better.
Well, you need to do your 10 observations in your black suit.
Yeah.
And you need to call a meeting and talk about what you see. You may go in and say, gee, I don't know what I'm looking for. Just sit and watch what's going on and watch your child. You'll be surprised, even though you may think you won't see anything, you'll begin to notice because you know your child pretty well.
Yeah.
And by the time you've done like your 8th observation, they're going to think you're crazy and they're going to want you off their back because it's taking administrative time. You call a meeting, you go over your observations, you tell them again you want testing, and if they won't do the testing, you'll go get it and you'll be back with a bill. You know, I mean, the thing that they need to understand is you won't go away. You know what they got with her? They know we're professionals in that neighborhood. I don't know where you are exactly, but probably.
Carmel Creek.
Yeah. So they know, and they do not want to get in trouble with people professionally that have time to do 10 observations. They don't want to have to put up with that. Now, I'm not saying they're all bad, but I think that the observations can inform you too, because if you go in 8 or 10 times and watch your child and you see he's pretty happy, he is happy, and seems to be following what's going on in class, and the teacher seems to be pretty clear in explanations, it might change your impression. Because I do have kids that do function well in school, and they come home and they just melt
He
down.
totally melts down. They can't remember anything he did in math. They can't do his homework.
Well, that's
They
what
don't
he's,
understand it.
right. I mean, if there are specific things, then you could go in and take a look at that time of day, like maybe look at the last period of the day or math period. But the comments I'm making are pretty general. I mean, I didn't want to get into specifics of a very serious problem. But to me, if I had limited resources, before I would go out and hire somebody, I would try to bring attention to my needs by myself. I mean, I would sit and think, like the pool guy came yesterday to fix our jacuzzi, which has been out for several months, and charges $180. The last night we tried to use it wouldn't work. I said to my husband, give me that thing, I'll call this guy. He says, no, he's really nice. So I called him today and I said, hey, Mike, I know you came out. I said, well, let's stop payment on that check. I said, our jacuzzi isn't working. We're so disappointed last night. I mean, I just did my husband's deal. That's his deal. He's very nice. He said, what's wrong with it? Well, I don't know anything. I can hardly run this. So I said, I think that the water's not going around. Oh, that's fine. Have him just call me. I can tell him how to fix it. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe it really was something small. But if that's not it, and we're dragging this on, then I'll deal with it. Because, but I think we need to all kind of back off and, really take the data and see what's really going on. And, it seems you have a lot of evidence. I also have kids that come home and get mom going by saying, oh my goodness, the teacher did something terrible today, and then somebody harassed me, and, because they want some attention.
And sometimes that becomes a cycle. The parent asks the child, what happened today? Did the teacher do this, or what did you notice? And so something that I often recommend to parents when I notice the cycle is going on, I say, okay, you can ask them how the day was, but I want you to end on a positive note. So I want them to tell you, something good that happened that day, whether it was, hanging out with their friends or whatever during lunch. But just so that it doesn't become all negative, and Sarah would tell you that I'm the nice one in the office. I very much like to go into the meetings.
I just say that to you in your face.
Oh, okay. But I'm kind of like Dan. I like to start off nice and soft and friendly and talking and questioning, because my experience has been, as a teacher, first of all, 18 years, and you have people coming into your classroom observing their children. And then as an administrator is, let's talk, let's dialogue, get some questions, but pay very close attention to everything they're saying. I was just in a 504 meeting. We've been trying to get a 504 for this student. I have been trying since September, and they kept denying. And so, they're sitting there, and the vice principal is saying, remember, it has to have a serious impact. And what do you notice, teacher? And so the teacher says, oh, well, this is what I see. And as the teacher is speaking, he's saying, well, I have him sit up close to me, and I have him, what else did he say? He said, I have him sitting up close to me, I let him have a little extra time to get the work done. Well, as a teacher, I know, oh, those are accommodations. See, if you read the little packet before you go in, you know that some of the things that they're doing are already accommodations. And so this vice principal, kept trying to discourage them from saying, yes, as a team, we agree that he deserves a 504. So after every teacher would speak, I would say, I noticed you said you do this, 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 and this already. It seems to me like you're already employing some accommodations. And why wouldn't we want to, formalize it? So finally one of the teachers who's sensing, the back and forth with the vice principal says, so what's going to happen to this kid if we say yes to a 504? I said, absolutely nothing. Nothing negative. And if he moves, he'll take it with him, and we don't have to go through this whole process. He'll be able to get the accommodations he needs. He says, well, he needs it. And I thought, thank goodness. But that happens, it happens, and there are times when you have to be strong-armed, because we were having that next meeting after so many that we had had, because I had gone to the director of special education, I had already written letters, you know, and everything, document, email, everything you
But
want
are
to
you saying
document.
that a parent's suspicion alone is enough to get them to do an IEP then? If
A
if you're saying,
parent's
fine,
sus-
think that they need, that he needs it, and so I'm gonna observe, and I observe this, and he's not paying attention, and he's doodling this, I mean, not to get him an IEP, to get him evaluated. So I don't need to have some specific things that I think he has.
Well, the first thing I would say, and it's hard for me to, I had a child in special ed with an IEP, but it was a long time ago. She's 40, so, and she's doing really well. But I deal from the top down, and it's hard for me to know if I didn't have many resources. And I was, like, let's say we were talking about competency in doing taxes. I don't know how to do tax forms. I'd have to fake it. I don't feel comfortable faking it, especially if I were in a room of accountants. So I can imagine the feeling of, you know, how do I go about getting something when someone said no? You can always go in and say, you know, we went to, I don't know where you are, and that sometimes helps me understand.
Unified.
Oh, that's right. I just went, call the principal and say you want to meet with the principal, wear your new IEP suit that you plan to wear to all the IEP meetings, and say, I just went to a lecture by 2 advocates who I'm thinking seriously might be helpful for me because I can't seem to get testing done. And I
You
need
most definitely want to say Sarah's name.
Well,
Am I right?
well, I would say that to her and say, I need your help. And if I don't, if I can't get what I need here, I'm gonna have to take some action, like filing an OCR complaint or something. Oh my God, that's a nightmare. An OCR, remember the 504?
Yeah.
The complaint process is you file with Office of Civil Rights if there's a violation of any of the ADA 504 issues. You know, if you're saying your child doesn't have equal access because grades are suffering or the child's suffering because he needs some special things and you want an evaluation, then, you know, you can just pass that off as, you know, oh gee, I might have to do something like this. Are you married?
Yes.
Okay, it's always good if you're talking, especially to a female principal, say, my husband just insists you have to do this. Or we're going to have to bring in, you know, some help.
Yeah, they've been blowing us up for a while, especially the school counselor, but partly it's been me because my daughter has even higher special needs. She's bipolar 1, so we keep thinking of our son, you know, he'll be all right, things will be okay, and that's what they're telling us. But my sister finally says to me, what if he were your only child, what would you be doing for him? And I realized I'd be fighting for him to get tested.
I just want to say something to say. Take your most aggressive friend with you and go and observe and take that friend with you to see the principal because I think that's
Your most aggressive bipolar friend.
Because if you know if you don't have a problem being the bad guy.
No, I don't.
Okay, well your friend can be, you know.
But you have to be serious about it. She's right. It's your demeanor. You know, people always thought that I was so smart. I didn't know what was going on. And then I learned that if I drove a Mercedes, everybody thought I was rich and that we had lots of clients. So then I said, okay, well, that works. No more ruffle blouses. You know, we can do, you know, the serious glasses and we can dress up. So I have like 15 pairs of black pants. I hate it. Oh my goodness, on the weekends you should see what I wear. But that works. People will listen. You have to like package what you want to say. Take her. You know, take someone. This organization ought to have a little advocacy committee of people that can work with each other and support each other. The people, I mean, you all think that I have a very high-end clientele, but I have some people that have very limited resources, but they're always already my clients. I don't do financial breaks to people off the street, but if I have a client gets cancer, somebody been to Iraq 3 times or whatever, you know, I will work with, we all will work with them. I mean, so, but I think first, if it were me, I would start with who is someone here that knows about those kinds of things that would go with you. Get a letter from your doctor. Write it for the doctor, because doctors, you have to write the letters for them. And then tell them what you need them to say, and then take it to the school. Don't make it medical, make it educational. Remember the I word. What's the impact of the bipolar on the child in terms of educational functioning?
I would also suggest that if you have already been to the school on several occasions and they haven't been paying attention to you, call the superintendent. Because I remember sitting in my administrator's office and the superintendent calls and says, I have a parent sitting here in my office and they have been to see you several times and nothing has been taken care of. Make sure you listen to them. It'll move.
I've actually asked a father to take his lunch and his kid and go down and sit in the district office all day until they listened to what he had to say. I didn't require that. As soon as they found out he was getting ready to come down, they called him and said, oh yeah, well, we worked something out. But there are things that you can do like that. When we take a case, we work it differently, but normally people don't come to us until they've knocked on those doors already. I mean, nobody wants to come in and pay a lot of money unless they've really tried everything they can. But this group, because bipolar doesn't necessarily equate to services, this group needs to have a little advocacy arm of a couple of people, 2 or 3, that could you could call, or Compass or Task is in Orange County, but they're helpful, or LDA.
Task is here in
I
San
don't know
Diego.
if they are.
Oh, good.
I went to classes with Task, but then I think they closed the office down here.
No, they have, it's still, it's in, off of 30th, I believe, in University.
Okay, well, we're done. Anyway, it's been really nice to be here. Thank you so much for asking us. I've learned a lot from listening to you all, and it's, even though it may not seem like it, I'm really glad to have a chance to meet everybody here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.